Good evening. This is Global Emergency Radio, and I want to be absolutely clear from the outset. We are receiving simultaneous, unconfirmed reports from 3 separate theaters of conflict spanning 2 continents and portions of the Pacific. I am Alex Mercer. I want to take a breath here and tell you what we actually know, as opposed to what is being rumored, because in moments like this, the difference between those 2 things is the difference between panic and preparation. What we know, verified through at least 2 independent wire sources as of this moment, is that military exchanges have occurred, kinetic exchanges, meaning weapons have been fired, between nation-state actors in Eastern Europe, the South China Sea, and the Persian Gulf corridor, and that all 3 of these engagements appear to have begun within the same 60-minute window. I will say that again for anyone just joining us. 3 separate military engagements, 3 separate regions of the world. 1 hour.
And I want to come in right alongside Alex here because I think it's important that people listening to this broadcast, people who may be driving home right now, people who may be sitting in their kitchens, people whose family members live in some of the regions we're going to be naming, understand that we are going to stay with you. We are not going anywhere. This station will remain on air. I'm Sierra Lane, and everything we tell you tonight will be sourced, attributed, and qualified. If we don't know something, we will tell you we don't know it. There is no shame in uncertainty during the first hours of something like this. In fact, uncertainty is the only honest posture available to any journalist right now. What I can tell you on the human side of what Alex just described is that the first calls we have received from listeners in affected regions describe something that sounds less like warfare and more like the sky itself changing. People are using words like silence before thunder, words like the ground deciding something. I don't know what that means yet, but we're going to find out together.
Let me walk through the 3 theaters as clearly as I can with the information we have right now. In Eastern Europe, the initial exchange appears to have occurred along the border corridor between Russia and the Baltic states. Specifically, early reports suggest the cities of Narva in Estonia and Pskov, just across the Russian side, experienced what multiple sources are describing as simultaneous strikes. Estonia is, of course, a NATO member state. The significance of that single fact cannot be overstated. If confirmed, this would trigger Article 5 of the NATO Charter, the Collective Defense Clause, meaning an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. We do not have confirmation from NATO headquarters in Brussels yet, but we have a statement attributed to the Estonian Prime Minister's office that uses the phrase, armed aggression on sovereign territory. That statement was posted and then removed from official government channels within about 11 minutes, which itself tells you something about how rapidly the information environment is degrading.
While Alex monitors the diplomatic picture, I want to tell you about a listener message we've already received. We're going to be sharing these throughout the broadcast because they ground this story in real human experience. This one comes from a woman who identifies herself only as Marta, and she says she is in Tallinn, the Estonian capital, roughly 200 kilometers west of the Narva border area. She writes, and I'm reading this directly, "We can hear something low and constant, like a truck engine that never arrives. My children are asking me what the sound is. I told them it is machinery. I don't know if I was right to lie." That message came in about 22 minutes ago. Marta, if you're still listening, we hear you, and we're going to keep telling you what we know.
Turning now to the South China Sea theater. This is in some ways the most geopolitically complex of the 3 engagements because of the number of sovereign claims and military presences overlapping in that body of water. What we're getting from wire services and from maritime traffic monitoring organizations is that a significant naval incident has occurred in the vicinity of the Spratly Islands, a chain of reefs and atolls in the southern South China Sea that both China and the Philippines, among others, maintain competing claims over. The report suggests that vessels, and we believe these to be warships, not civilian craft, have exchanged fire. The word being used in two separate wire dispatches is sustained, meaning this was not a single warning shot or a single defensive response. This was a sustained exchange. The Philippines has a mutual defense treaty with the United States. China has been expanding its naval infrastructure in this region for over a decade. Those two facts, sitting next to each other, are what analysts will be studying for a very long time.
And in the Persian Gulf, Alex, walk us through what we know there, because this is the third piece of this. And I think people need to understand the geometry of what we're looking at.
In the Persian Gulf, the reports are the most fragmentary of the three, but they are not less serious for being fragmentary. What we believe happened, and I will qualify this carefully, is that there was a strike on naval infrastructure in or near the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's traded oil passes. It is flanked by Iran on one side, and Oman and the United Arab Emirates on the other. The identity of the striking party is not confirmed. Iran's state media has published a statement, and we have a translation here, that says, quote, "Any act of aggression against the sovereign waters of the Islamic Republic will be met with a response of equal or greater magnitude." That statement does not confirm Iran as the responding party. It does not confirm Iran as the striking party, but it is a statement that exists. That is on the record, and that we must report.
I want to pause here for a moment, not to slow the information down, but because I think people deserve to have the weight of what Alex just described land before we move forward. We are looking at three separate military engagements. One in Europe involving a NATO ally, one in the Pacific involving a U.S. treaty partner, and one in the Persian Gulf involving a waterway that feeds the global economy, all of which appear to have begun within the same hour. And here's the question that I think every person listening to this is already asking themselves. Is that a coincidence? And the answer, even without any confirmed intelligence, even without a single leaked document or official briefing, is that three wars do not start in the same hour by accident. Something coordinated this. Someone coordinated this. Or something broke in a way that made all three of these things happen at once.
We're now about 40 minutes into our coverage, and I want to update the casualty picture as best we can. These numbers are preliminary, and they will change, almost certainly upward. From the Estonian theater, the Narva Municipal Emergency Services reported, via a post on a regional emergency alert network that was captured before a broader communication disruption, that there were casualties in the, quote, dozens. From the South China Sea naval engagement, we have no civilian casualty figures yet. This appears at this stage to be a military-on-military exchange, though we cannot rule out the involvement or presence of civilian fishing vessels in the area, of which there are always many in that region. From the Persian Gulf, we are receiving reports of an explosion at a port facility in Bandar Abbas, a major Iranian port on the Strait of Hormuz. And the casualty figure being cited in one regional report is, and I want to be careful here, over 200. That figure is unverified. I am going to repeat that. That figure is unverified.
200 people. I want to hold that number for a moment, because each one of those 200, if that number is accurate, was a person who got up this morning, who had a cup of tea or coffee or nothing at all, who had arguments they hadn't finished yet and words they hadn't said. I don't want us to get so deep into the strategic analysis, and Alex's strategic analysis is crucial and important, that we forget that what we are talking about is the destruction of human life. The port at Bandar Abbas employs tens of thousands of workers. It is a working port with container ships and longshoremen and fuel tankers and administrative staff. It is not an abstraction.
I want to bring in some additional context about the timing of these events, because there is a specific analytical concern that is being raised in early commentary from defense analysts we've been able to reach by phone. The concern is this. All three engagements appear to have begun during a period when the United States military was in the middle of what's called a scheduled readiness rotation, essentially a pre-planned movement of carrier groups and forward deployed assets. That rotation, which was publicly announced 30 days ago as a routine exercise, meant that at the specific moment these engagements began, U.S. military response capability in each of the three theaters was fractionally reduced compared to normal. Not absent, not incapacitated, but reduced by a margin that would be meaningful to any strategic planner who studied American force posture carefully. Whether that is a coincidence or whether it represents the result of months of surveillance and planning is something we simply cannot determine at this hour. But the timing has been noticed.
We have another listener message I want to share. This one comes from a man who says he is a merchant sailor currently aboard a container vessel in the South China Sea, roughly 300 kilometers north of the Spratly Islands. He has asked that we not use his name, and we won't. He writes, "We have been ordered to change course by the vessel's captain. There are warships on radar in multiple directions. We cannot raise Manila. We cannot raise Singapore. We are going north. I am writing to tell someone where we are. The sky to the south looks orange." That message was received about 15 minutes ago. To that sailor and to his crew, you are not alone. There are many people listening to this broadcast who are in similar positions tonight, and we will continue to provide whatever navigational guidance and safe corridor information we receive.
We now have a confirmed statement from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'm going to read this in full because every word of it matters. The statement reads, "The North Atlantic Council has been convened in emergency session. NATO allies are monitoring with grave concern the reports of military activity in the Baltic region. All allies are reminded of their obligations under Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which requires each member to maintain and develop its individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. A further statement will be issued following the conclusion of emergency consultations." That is the full statement. What I want to point out is what is not in that statement. Article 5 is not invoked, not yet. The language used is Article 3, the individual and collective capacity clause. That is a preparatory posture. It is serious. It is not the tripwire, but it is one step removed from it.
And we're now hearing from European capitals more broadly. We have an unverified report that commercial air traffic over Eastern Europe is experiencing significant disruption. Multiple flights have been diverted away from what air traffic controllers are describing as restricted airspace over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Passengers aboard diverted aircraft are reportedly stranded in Helsinki, Warsaw, and Stockholm. We've received messages from 3 separate listeners who say they are aboard grounded flights at Warsaw Chopin Airport, and that no official explanation has been given to passengers. One listener writes simply, "The pilot came on the intercom and said we would be delayed. He sounded like he was reading something for the first time while he said it."
We're now approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes into this broadcast. I want to give you a revised situational picture. In the Baltic Theater, the exchange near Narva appears to have escalated. We are receiving, and this is from a single source, a journalist who works for a Finnish public broadcaster and who has contacts on the ground in the area. We are receiving reports that the Narva River Bridge, which serves as a crossing point between the Estonian city of Narva and the Russian city of Ivangorod on the opposite bank, has been destroyed. If the Narva River Bridge has been destroyed, that represents a significant tactical escalation. It also means approximately 80,000 civilian residents on both sides of that border are now cut off from the primary crossing. In the South China Sea, the situation has widened. We now have reports of aircraft, not just naval vessels, aircraft involvement in the engagement zone. The Philippines Armed Forces have released a statement confirming that they have scrambled fighter aircraft. In the Gulf, The Bandar Abbas casualty figure has been revised upward by the single source we have. It is now being cited as over 400.
400 people in a port explosion. While in 2 other places on the Earth, other people are dying other deaths for other reasons. I want people to understand. I want to make sure this doesn't become a kind of numbing experience where the numbers just accumulate and we stop feeling them. 400 people is the size of a small school. It is the size of a village. It is an entire neighborhood worth of human beings. Gone in what is being described as a single strike event at a port facility that was, until this evening, one of the largest commercial ports on the Persian Gulf coast.
We are now receiving reports of power grid disruptions in several locations that I want to catalog because the pattern is notable. Northeastern Estonia is reporting a grid disruption. This would be consistent with kinetic activity near critical infrastructure in the Narva region, as that area hosts a significant portion of Estonia's electricity generation capacity through its oil shale power plants. We are also receiving reports of communications disruptions, not power failures, but communications disruptions, in portions of the Philippine island of Palawan, which is the westernmost major island of the Philippines and which sits closest to the South China Sea engagement zone. And we have an unconfirmed report that satellite communications providers are experiencing anomalous service degradation in a band stretching from the Persian Gulf eastward across the northern Indian Ocean. Whether that is a result of physical damage to undersea cable infrastructure, deliberate jamming, or simply overwhelming network demand from people trying to reach family members, we do not know.
The refugee picture is beginning to develop. Estonian public radio, and we have a colleague who monitors their broadcast and is relaying information to us. Estonian public radio is advising residents of northeastern Estonia, particularly in Ida-Viru County, to evacuate westward toward Tartu and Tallinn. The roads out of Narva are described as, quote, heavily congested but passable. There are reports of people leaving on foot who could not get in cars. There are reports of a family who turned back because an elderly grandmother could not walk the distance, and there was no room for her in the car that a neighbor offered. These are the details that are going to define the story. Not the missile trajectories, not the naval coordinates, but the grandmother and the neighbor and the car that wasn't quite big enough.
I want to address a question that is arising in listener messages and that I think deserves a direct answer. The question is, why is this happening now? What is the proximate cause of these 3 engagements beginning in the same window? I want to be honest that we don't have a confirmed answer to that question. What we have is context. Russia has been conducting military exercises near the Baltic border for the past 6 weeks. Exercises that NATO characterized as provocative, but not unprecedented. In the South China Sea, a disputed reef that China has been constructing military infrastructure on was the subject of a Philippines Coast Guard patrol that occurred 2 days ago, and that China's foreign ministry called in their statement an illegal encroachment. In the Persian Gulf, U.S. and Iranian naval vessels had a close quarters encounter in the Strait of Hormuz 9 days ago that was reported briefly and then faded from the news cycle. Each of these individual triggers, in isolation, would have been manageable. All of them, detonating in sequence or simultaneously, created something that none of the individual crisis management systems was designed to handle.
We have our first on-air caller. She asked us to identify her as Helena, and she says she is a nurse at a hospital in Tartu, Estonia. That is in central Estonia, about 160 kilometers southwest of Narva, and it is where many of the evacuees from the border area are now heading. Helena, you're on the air.
Yes, I am here. We have been receiving patients for about 3 hours now. Some of them came by car, some came on buses. Some people drove themselves and were injured from accidents on the roads. The roads were very crowded and dark in places because the streetlights are out. We have patients with broken bones from accidents. We also have patients, I do not want to be specific, we have patients with injuries that are not from car accidents. We have called for additional blood supply. We are managing. I want to say that we are managing. My colleagues are extraordinary people, but I want people to know that if they have supplies, if they have medicine at home that they can bring, we will not turn it away.
Helena, thank you. You heard it. If you are in the Tartu area and you have medical supplies, go to the hospital. And Helena, you and your colleagues are doing something remarkable tonight.
We now have a confirmed statement from the United States government. I'm going to read it in full. The statement reads, "The President of the United States has been briefed on the ongoing situation in multiple theaters of concern. The President has ordered an immediate review of U.S. force posture in the relevant regions and has directed the Secretaries of Defense and State to be available for consultations with allied nations. The United States reaffirms its treaty obligations to all allies and partners and calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities in all affected regions. The United States is monitoring the situation closely and will provide further updates as warranted." I want to note one word that is conspicuously absent from this statement: the word war. The administration has not used that word. They have not characterized what is happening as a war. They have used the phrase theaters of concern. That is diplomatic language. It is also a sign that the administration is not yet prepared to define this publicly in the starkest possible terms, which could mean they are still negotiating behind closed doors. Or it could mean they are simply moving cautiously in a situation where moving incautiously could accelerate something that is already moving very fast.
We're now approximately 3 hours into this broadcast and into this event, and I want to take stock of what the human geography of tonight looks like. In Estonia, somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people are on the roads heading west. The numbers are early and unreliable, but the direction is clear. People are leaving the northeast. In the Philippine island of Palawan, the government has ordered residents of coastal barangays, that is the Filipino term for the smallest administrative subdivision, essentially a neighborhood or village, coastal barangays near the western coast to move inland. That represents tens of thousands of people. In Iran, we have no official evacuation guidance, but we are getting reports through social media. And I want to be careful about how much weight we place on social media. We are getting reports of civilian movement away from Bandar Abbas and the coastal areas along the Strait of Hormuz.
The power grid picture is developing in ways that concern me significantly. Estonia's main power interconnector with Latvia has gone offline. That is not the same as a missile strike. That could be a precautionary shutdown by grid operators. But it means that the Baltic states are now operating their electrical grids in a more isolated configuration than they were 4 hours ago. More significantly, I want to tell you about a development in the South China Sea that has significant commercial implications. The Luzon Strait, which is the body of water between Taiwan and the Philippine island of Luzon, carries a remarkable concentration of undersea fiber optic cables. Roughly 95% of all digital communications traffic between East Asia and the rest of the world passes through cables in that general corridor. We are receiving fragmentary reports that some of that cable infrastructure may have been damaged. I want to be careful. We don't know if this is a direct result of military action, if it is incidental to the naval engagement, or if there has been deliberate targeting of communication infrastructure. What we know is that several major internet service providers in the Asia-Pacific region are reporting significant service degradation, and that the timing correlates with the engagement near the Spratlys.
If what Alex is describing is accurate, and we don't know that it is, but if it is, then the consequences of this event are already beginning to ripple far beyond the immediate zones of military activity. Because those cables, that digital infrastructure, it does not just carry news or social media, It carries banking transactions. It carries medical records. It carries the communications of global supply chains. If a significant portion of that cable network is damaged tonight, the effects will be felt in places that have no idea anything is happening right now.
We have now received a second confirmed government statement, this one from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It reads, "The People's Republic of China has been subjected to a deliberate provocation in the South China Sea by foreign naval forces operating in violation of Chinese sovereign territorial waters. The People's Liberation Army Navy has responded in accordance with Chinese law and in defense of Chinese sovereignty. China calls on all parties to cease provocative actions immediately. China reserves the right to take all necessary measures to protect its territorial integrity." This statement does not name the Philippines. It does not name the United States. It says foreign naval forces, and it says all parties. But the framing, the characterization of Chinese actions as defense and response, is significant. It is China's formal entry into the public record of this event.
And now the Philippines has responded. We have a statement from the Philippine Department of National Defense. Philippine naval and air forces are actively engaged in the defense of Philippine sovereign waters and the protection of Filipino fishermen and maritime workers in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines has invoked the Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States and requests immediate consultation under Article 4 of that treaty. Article 4. Not the automatic commitment of Article 5, the Philippines treaty structure is different from NATO, but the invocation of the treaty, the request for consultation. That is the Philippines pulling the United States formally into this by treaty obligation.
We are now 4 hours and approximately 15 minutes into this. The casualty picture continues to develop. In Estonia, the figure being cited by Estonian government sources via a statement posted to an emergency information portal is 74 confirmed dead and approximately 280 wounded. These are civilian and military casualties combined, concentrated in the Narva area. In the South China Sea, we now have a casualty figure for the first time. The Philippine Armed Forces have confirmed 31 members of the Philippine Navy killed in the initial engagement. No figure yet for Chinese casualties. The Bandar Abbas casualty figure, which remains from a single source, is now being reported by that source as approximately 900 dead or missing. I want to be direct about that word missing. In a port explosion context, missing often means dead but unrecovered.
900 people. I have been trying to keep my composure throughout this broadcast, and I will continue to do so. But 900 people in a single port explosion, if that number is accurate, that is a number that puts this event in a specific historical context. That is a number that belongs in the same sentence as some of the worst single-event civilian disasters of the modern era. And that is in one of 3 ongoing situations. The weight of tonight is something I don't think any of us, including Alex and me, fully have the capacity to process in real time, but we owe you the attempt.
I want to walk through the military picture now with a more granular lens, because the first chaotic hours of a multi-theater conflict are when patterns begin to emerge. In the Baltic theater, we are now receiving reports from Finnish and Swedish defense sources, both of which are NATO members and have significant interest in Baltic security, that Russian military units have advanced across the Estonian border in a corridor extending roughly 15 kilometers south and west of the destroyed Narva Bridge. This is no longer a border incident. This is territory. Estonian territory, approximately a 15-kilometer deep zone, is now under Russian military occupation. That sentence has not been spoken in modern European history in quite this way. The NATO Article 5 clock is running.
We have a listener named Tumas who says he is in Jofi. That is a town in northeastern Estonia, roughly 20 kilometers west of Narva, in the direction of that advancing Russian corridor. He called in rather than writing. He was breathing hard when we connected. He says he and his wife and their 2 teenage sons left their home about 2 hours ago when they heard the news. They drove west on the main road toward Tartu. The road was stop and start for a long time. Then it moved. He says he kept looking in his rearview mirror because he could see a glow on the horizon to the east, low in the sky. He said it looked at first like sunrise, and then he remembered that east was east and sunrise didn't come that way anymore. He is now at a sports facility in Tartu that has been opened as an emergency shelter. He sounds exhausted. He sounds like a man who is holding himself together with both hands.
The sports facility in Tartu is one of several civilian shelter points that have been activated according to Estonian civil defense protocols. Estonia, it should be noted, has maintained civil defense infrastructure more robustly than most European nations. In part because of its geography and history, it has never fully abandoned the assumption that something like tonight might happen. They have shelter manuals in schools. They have emergency supply caches. Their civil defense drills are taken seriously. That institutional preparation is, in all likelihood, saving lives tonight. Not enough lives, but lives.
And I want to set that against the other side of the preparation question, which is that a country can prepare all at once and still find that the actual arrival of what it prepared for is a different and heavier thing than the exercise. The manuals say what to do. They don't say what it feels like to do it. They don't say what it feels like to drive away from your house in the dark and not know if you'll ever see it again. Tumas knows.
We are now 5.5 hours in. I want to report a significant development in the Persian Gulf theater. The United States Fifth Fleet, which is headquartered in Bahrain, and which is responsible for U.S. naval operations in the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and parts of the Indian Ocean. The Fifth Fleet has issued an emergency maritime safety notice declaring a 200 nautical mile exclusion zone around the Strait of Hormuz. This is extraordinary. The Strait of Hormuz is 17 miles wide at its narrowest point. It is the only sea route from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. An exclusion zone around it effectively closes it, which means that any vessel currently in the Persian Gulf, and there are hundreds of vessels in the Persian Gulf at any given moment, carrying oil, liquefied natural gas, container goods. All of those vessels are now, in effect, trapped until that exclusion zone is lifted.
Hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, millions of barrels of oil that are not going to reach their destinations. And behind that oil, behind those containers, heating fuel that won't arrive in winter, medications that won't be delivered, food supplies that won't reach ports. The Strait of Hormuz as an economic artery. I want people to understand this in real terms. About 20% of all the oil that the world uses on a daily basis passes through that strait. When you close it, even temporarily, the effects are felt within hours on energy markets, which means within days on food prices, which means within weeks on the cost of keeping a family alive in a lower income household anywhere in the world. This is already a global event, not just a regional one.
A significant development I need to report. We have now received confirmation from 3 independent sources that Article 5 of the NATO treaty has been invoked. NATO's Secretary General has held a brief press availability from NATO headquarters in Brussels and has stated, and I'm reading from a wire service transcript, the North Atlantic Council has determined that the attack on Estonia constitutes an attack on all allies. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is invoked. Allied forces are being placed on the highest state of readiness. NATO will respond. That is the most consequential sentence spoken in European security in decades. NATO Article 5 has never before been invoked in response to a conflict involving a nuclear-armed state.
I need to sit with that for a moment. NATO Article 5 invoked against a nuclear-armed adversary. Every person listening to this broadcast knows consciously or unconsciously what the word at the end of that chain of reasoning is. It is a word we have not spoken yet tonight, and I am not certain we should speak it lightly. But it is a word that is now present in this broadcast, in this night, in this world, in a way that it was not 4 hours ago.
We're now 7 hours into this event. I want to take stock of where things stand structurally. In the Baltic Theater, Russian forces hold a section of northeastern Estonia, approximately 400 square kilometers. Estonian military and police are conducting a controlled defense and retreat, preserving force structure. The first NATO reinforcement flights, airlifts of personnel and equipment, have departed from Germany and Poland according to wire reports. The bridge at Narva is destroyed. The cities of Narva and Sillamäe in northeastern Estonia are effectively under Russian control or contested, with a combined civilian population of approximately 70,000 people. Those 70,000 people, those who couldn't or didn't evacuate, are now in an occupied zone.
70,000 people, living under an advancing military occupation. I want you to hear that number not as a statistic, but as a neighborhood, as 70,000 individual stories. There will be elderly people who had nowhere to go. There will be disabled people who couldn't move fast enough. There will be people who didn't believe it would happen right up until it did. There will be people who stayed because they refused to leave their homes. There will be hospital patients who couldn't be moved. There will be, somewhere in Narva tonight, a neonatal ward with infants who cannot be evacuated, and nurses who will not leave them.
In the South China Sea Theater, the naval engagement has now involved confirmed participation by American naval forces. The USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group, which was approximately 400 nautical miles northeast of the Spratly Islands when the engagement began, has moved into what the U.S. Pacific Fleet is characterizing as a defensive posture in support of Philippine forces. There has been at least one confirmed aerial engagement between Philippine and Chinese aircraft. One Philippine FA-50 fighter has been shot down. The pilot has not been located. Chinese state media is reporting that a People's Liberation Army Navy destroyer has been severely damaged. We cannot confirm the Chinese figure, but we cannot deny it. We have from American sources confirmation that an American guided missile destroyer, the USS Fitzgerald, has been struck and is taking on water. American sailors are in the water in the South China Sea right now.
American sailors in the water. I don't need to explain to anyone listening what that means in terms of American public response, American political response, American military response. There is a historical pattern to how this nation responds to sailors in the water. That pattern is not subtle.
In the Persian Gulf theater, the situation is, if anything, the most complex to assess. We now have reports, not from a single source, but from multiple regional sources, that suggest the initial strike at Bandar Abbas was not the action of a state military, but may have been a non-state actor, a proxy force, operating with what one analyst is carefully calling material support from a regional power. That phrase is diplomatic packaging for what is essentially an accusation without a fingerprint. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval forces have moved additional vessels into the Strait of Hormuz in apparent defiance of the U.S. exclusion zone. There have been warning shots fired. Not yet a direct exchange between U.S. and Iranian forces, but the warning shots have been fired, and the next step after warning shots has a name.
We are 8 hours in. I want to share what has become an extraordinary accumulation of listener messages, and I want to read a few of them because the texture of tonight, the specific details of how this is landing on individual human beings in different corners of the world, is something I feel strongly we must preserve as a record. From Rika in Manila, the Philippine capital. My brother is in the Navy. I haven't heard from him in 6 hours. I keep refreshing the Defense Ministry page. It hasn't been updated since this morning. I don't know what I'm listening to this broadcast for, except that it feels better than silence. From Dmitry in St. Petersburg, Russia. I am ashamed of what my country is doing. I cannot say this loudly. I am saying it to you. Please tell the world that not every Russian wanted this. From Arash, who says he is an Iranian student studying in Vienna, Austria. My family is in Bandar Abbas. I have not been able to reach them for 11 hours. I need to know if they are alive. I cannot find any information. Please, if anyone has information about civilians in Bandar Abbas, please say so on this broadcast.
Arash, we will do everything we can to get information about the civilian situation in Bandar Abbas on this broadcast. To Rika, we understand. To Dmitry, we hear you, and the distinction between a government's actions and its citizens' desires is one that must be maintained in any honest account of this event. I want to give a casualty update as we enter our 8th hour. These numbers are, as always, preliminary and almost certainly underestimates, because in the early hours of events like this, the dead are counted after the living are found. In Estonia, the government is now reporting 112 confirmed dead, with over 500 wounded. In the Philippine theater, Filipino and Chinese combined naval casualties, over 250 dead by the lowest available estimate. In the Persian Gulf, the Bandar Abbas figure, now carried by multiple regional news agencies, stands at approximately 1,400 dead or missing. Total across 3 theaters, over the first 8 hours, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 human lives.
2,000 to 3,000 people in 8 hours. While most of the world was sleeping or having dinner or tucking children in, 2,000 to 3,000 people is the size of a mid-sized college. It is a village. It is the entire graduating class of a large high school 4 or 5 times over, and this is only the 8th hour.
We are now approximately 10 hours in. I want to report some significant developments in the infrastructure picture that go beyond the battlefield. The Port of Singapore, which is the world's second busiest port by cargo tonnage and the central node of maritime commerce in Southeast Asia, has announced that it is suspending vessel movements out of caution as the security situation in the South China Sea develops. Vessels are not being sent in the direction of the conflict zone. That is a prudent maritime safety decision. It is also a decision that has economic consequences that will compound daily. The Dubai Ports World Authority, which manages port operations across the Gulf region, has suspended operations at Jebel Ali Port in Dubai, the largest port in the Middle East, citing security concerns related to the Persian Gulf situation. We now have 2 of the world's most strategically critical maritime hubs, either closed or severely restricted. The implications for global supply chains are difficult to overstate.
And I want to add the human dimension of those port closures. When a port closes, it is not just ships that stop. It is the dock workers who go home to families wondering if they will be paid. It is the truck drivers sitting in queue with nowhere to go. It is the small businesses in port cities who depend on the daily rhythm of commerce. It is the migrant workers in many of these port cities who are often the most economically marginal and who have the fewest resources to weather disruption. The global supply chain is an abstraction until you meet one of the approximately 30 million people whose daily income depends on it moving.
12 hours since the first reports. I want to give a comprehensive situational assessment as clearly as I can. In Estonia, Russian forces have consolidated their hold on northeastern Estonia and appear to be attempting to extend the corridor westward. NATO forces, primarily from Poland, Germany, and the United Kingdom, with U.S. air support, are conducting what is being described as active reinforcement operations. There has been no use of strategic weapons, no missiles, no aircraft strikes on major population centers, no indication that this has moved from a conventional theater war. Yet, Estonia's government has relocated from Tallinn to a secure facility whose location has not been disclosed. The president of Estonia has made a public broadcast, not in person, by audio, calling on Estonians to resist and calling on allies to fulfill their treaty obligations. Her voice, as relayed to us by colleagues monitoring Estonian radio, was calm, steady, the kind of calm that only comes from having prepared yourself for the possibility of this moment.
That kind of calm is something I keep finding in the accounts coming to us tonight. From nurses, from the Estonian president, from a ferry captain in Tallinn harbor who, we have this from a maritime source, who, when ordered to evacuate his vessel of civilian passengers in case the harbor needed to be cleared for military use, instead volunteered to make additional crossing runs to transport wounded civilians from the coastal evacuation points. He made 5 extra runs. He is still running.
In the Pacific Theater, the situation has grown significantly more complex in the last 2 hours. China has issued what its foreign ministry is calling a final warning to United States naval forces operating in the South China Sea, demanding that the USS Ronald Reagan and its strike group withdraw from what China characterizes as Chinese territorial waters. The United States Pacific Fleet has not withdrawn. American aircraft are operating in contested airspace. There have now been multiple aerial engagements. We have confirmed losses on both sides. In addition, Taiwan, which has been observing all of this with extraordinary anxiety, Taiwan's defense ministry has reported that Chinese military aircraft are conducting what it is calling unprecedented overflight activity of the Taiwan Strait. This is not just about the Spratlys anymore. Taiwan is in the picture.
When you say Taiwan is in the picture, Alex, I want to make sure every person listening understands what that means. Taiwan is a self-governing democracy of about 23 million people. China considers it a breakaway province. The United States has a policy of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan's defense, which means we neither commit to defending it nor abandon it. If China were to use this crisis as a window to move on Taiwan, while American attention and resources are split across 3 theaters, the consequences would be incalculable. 23 million people.
It is now 14 hours since the first reports. The world is not what it was 14 hours ago. I want to be precise about that. It is not dramatically destroyed. Most cities are intact. Most power grids are functioning. Most people are waking up this morning. Because it is morning now in Europe, late night in Asia, evening in the Americas, and the sun is coming up. The sun does not know. But 14 hours ago, 3 simultaneous military engagements began in the same hour, and the number of dead is now estimated. And I will preface this with every appropriate caveat. The number of dead is now estimated at somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 people. The precise number does not matter in one sense, and matters enormously in another. What matters is the trajectory. These numbers are not stable. They are moving.
They are moving in one direction. I want to say something here that I think needs to be said on this broadcast, on the public record. We are, in the history of events like this, at approximately the point where decisions made in the next 24 to 48 hours will determine whether what we have seen so far is the worst of it or the beginning of it. Every statesperson, every military commander, every diplomat who is awake right now, and they are all awake, is holding one question. And the question is, can this be stopped before it becomes something that no longer has a word? And the answer to that question is not yet determined.
We are now 18 hours in. I need to report a development that changes the nature of this broadcast. United States forces have engaged directly with Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. This is no longer a proxy conflict in the Persian Gulf. This is a direct exchange between American and Iranian military forces. One Iranian fast attack craft has been sunk. One American Coast Guard cutter operating in support of Fifth Fleet has been severely damaged and is reporting casualties. The United States and Iran are, by any military definition, in direct armed conflict. Simultaneously, in the South China Sea, the USS Fitzgerald, the guided missile destroyer that was struck earlier in the event, has sunk. 22 sailors are confirmed dead. Approximately 80 are reported missing. An American warship, a United States Navy destroyer, has been sunk in the South China Sea by the armed forces of China. The United States and China are, by any military definition, in direct armed conflict.
I need a moment. I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to take a moment. An American warship sunk. American sailors dead in the South China Sea. 80 unaccounted for. 80 families, somewhere in America right now, who don't know. Who are listening to broadcasts like this one. Who are looking at their phones. Who are calling numbers that may or may not be answered. I am going to stay on this broadcast. I am going to keep doing my job. But I want to acknowledge that the distance between the coverage of an event and the enormity of an event is a distance I am feeling very sharply right now.
We are 22 hours in. I want to attempt a broader assessment. The 3 simultaneous engagements of the first hour have, over the past 22 hours, drawn in additional parties in ways that have expanded the geometry of this conflict. NATO is at war with Russia in Estonia. The United States is at war with China in the South China Sea and with Iran in the Persian Gulf. These are not proxy conflicts with ambiguous legal frameworks. These are direct military conflicts between the world's largest military powers. And the question that every analyst, every diplomat, every policymaker is asking right now, the question that we as journalists must ask and answer and ask again is, where are the constraints? What are the red lines? And are those red lines going to hold?
Over the past several hours, we have received thousands of listener messages. I want to share some that have arrived just in the last hour. From Yuki in Tokyo. My city is quiet, but everyone is watching the news. No one is going to work today. No one knows if they should. The trains are running, but they're almost empty. From Samuel in Lagos, Nigeria. We are watching the price of fuel double at the petrol stations since last night. The filling station lines are around the block. My country has nothing to do with this war, and yet here we are. From Maria in Rio de Janeiro. My children ask me if it will come here. I tell them no. I don't know if I am right. From Peter in London. I served in the military for 20 years. I thought I was prepared for something like this. I am not.
It is now 28 hours since the first reports. The sun has now risen and set and risen again in Estonia. The conflict in the Baltic has not resolved. It has stabilized in a military sense along a line that roughly follows the eastern portion of Estonia, with Russian forces consolidated in the northeast and NATO forces holding the line further west. That stabilization is not peace. It is a battlefield pause with active artillery exchanges. The civilian toll in northeastern Estonia, in the occupied zone, is beginning to come into focus, and the picture is not good. We are receiving reports from humanitarian organizations who are attempting to operate in the area. The International Committee of the Red Cross has requested humanitarian corridors of significant civilian casualties in Narva from the initial military exchanges. The city has no power. It has no running water. Its main hospital, the East Tallinn Central Hospital, had a Narva affiliate, is operating on generator power that is now running low.
A hospital on failing generator power, in a city that is occupied by a foreign military, in a country that is now inside an active war zone. There are patients in that hospital, so surgical patients, dialysis patients, intensive care patients, whose lives depend on power that is running out. There are doctors and nurses who stayed because there was simply no other choice. What do you call people like that? We have many words. Heroes is one. I keep thinking about the fact that most of them would reject that word. Most of them would say, I just didn't leave. But not leaving, in those circumstances, is the most meaningful thing a human being can do.
36 hours in. The global economic picture has become severe in ways that extend the conflict's reach into every household on Earth, regardless of whether that household has any connection to any of the three theaters. Oil futures have risen approximately 60% since the start of the event, driven by the Strait of Hormuz closure and the uncertainty it represents. Shipping insurance rates, which govern whether commercial vessels can afford to transit certain areas, have reached levels not seen since the Gulf War period. The financial markets in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Shanghai are experiencing extreme volatility or have suspended trading entirely. The London Stock Exchange opened this morning and immediately triggered circuit breakers, automatic trading halts, in the first 8 minutes of trading. The New York Stock Exchange has not yet opened, and there is significant uncertainty about whether it will open today at normal time.
I want to make sure we don't lose the human story inside the economic data. When oil rises 60%, that is not an abstraction for a family in Indonesia that depends on kerosene for cooking. When shipping insurance halts and container ships sit idle, that is not an abstraction for a small business owner in Accra or Nairobi who is waiting for goods that will not arrive. When stock markets collapse, that is not only a tragedy for people with investment portfolios, it is a signal that the engine of global economic activity is beginning to seize. And when that engine seizes, the people who suffer first and worst are always the people with the least.
It is now 44 hours since the first reports. 3 major developments I need to convey. First, China has issued what analysts are calling an ultimatum to the United States, demanding the withdrawal of all American naval forces from what China designates as its exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea within 24 hours. The White House has not responded publicly. Second, Russia has announced, through its defense ministry, that it is prepared to discuss a humanitarian pause in the Baltic conflict, contingent on what it terms a recognition of the historical and cultural claims of Russian-speaking populations in northeastern Estonia. NATO has rejected this framing as a precondition, but has not rejected the concept of a humanitarian pause. Third, and I deliver this with the same level of care I have tried to bring to every piece of information tonight. There are reports, unconfirmed, from a single intelligence-adjacent source, of movement by Russian strategic forces. I want to be absolutely clear. This does not mean nuclear weapons have been moved or armed. Strategic forces movement can represent many things, including routine readiness adjustments and political signaling. But it is a report that exists, and I would be doing a disservice to this broadcast's commitment to transparency by withholding it.
The word that Alex is carefully not saying is the word I mentioned earlier. And the care with which he is not saying it tells you everything about how seriously everyone in this building is taking it. I want to say something that I mean as journalism, not as comfort, because false comfort in this situation would be a kind of betrayal. The history of the nuclear era includes many moments when the unthinkable appeared to be imminent. Berlin, Cuba, the Yom Kippur War, 1983. And in each of those cases, the crisis was ultimately walked back, sometimes by extraordinary individual judgment, sometimes by institutional constraint, sometimes by sheer luck. That history does not guarantee the same outcome now, but it is history that exists. The people who managed those crises back from the brink were human beings with the same limitations as the human beings who are managing this one.
It is now 52 hours in. The casualty figures have crossed a threshold that requires a different kind of acknowledgement. The running estimate from the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator, who has issued a situation report in the past hour, puts the conflict-related death toll across all 3 theaters at approximately 22,000 people. This includes military and civilian casualties. It includes deaths from direct military action, from evacuation accidents, from medical system failure due to infrastructure collapse, and from one specific secondary disaster that I have not yet mentioned: a dam on the Narva River, the Narva Reservoir Dam, which controls a large body of water on the Russian-Estonian border. This dam was apparently struck in the fighting and has partially failed. The resulting flooding has impacted a significant area of low-lying land on both sides of the border. The human toll of that flooding is not yet fully known, but we are receiving reports of villages inundated.
Villages inundated. That phrase. I keep thinking about all the things that are in those villages, the photographs people didn't take with them, the dogs that couldn't fit in the car, the grave markers of grandparents, the root cellars full of vegetables someone spent the summer growing, the half-finished wood carving on the workbench. A civilization's material texture, the actual substance of human lives submerged, not by a natural flood, by a war.
We are at 60 hours. I want to update the territorial picture in each theater. In Estonia, the Russian advance has been halted by NATO reinforcement. The line of contact, what analysts are calling the front line, runs roughly from the town of Jovi north to the Gulf of Finland. East of that line, Russian-controlled territory, including Narva, Sillamäe, and approximately 600 square kilometers of northeastern Estonia. The occupied zone holds, we estimate, somewhere between 60 and 80,000 civilians who were unable to evacuate. West of the line, NATO-held territory. The war in Europe has, for the moment, a front line. In the South China Sea, ongoing aerial and naval combat. The Philippines' main naval base at Subic Bay has been struck by Chinese missiles. Significant damage. American and Chinese forces are in sustained combat. Taiwan has announced its military is at full readiness. In the Persian Gulf, a de facto blockade of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian and American naval forces, each attempting to control the strait, has resulted in essentially no commercial traffic moving through the world's most critical oil choke point for the past 48 hours. The price consequences are now being felt at fuel stations across the globe.
We are now at 72 hours, 3 full days since the first reports. And I want to tell you about something that is happening alongside the violence and the destruction, because it is also part of the story. In Warsaw, Polish civil society organizations have, without government instruction, organized a convoy of medical supplies destined for Estonia. Volunteers, doctors, drivers, logistics workers assembled through social media in 36 hours, and the convoy departed this morning. In Manila, nurses and midwives who cannot get to the naval bases have set up volunteer trauma clinics in community centers in coastal neighborhoods. In cities across Europe and North America, there have been spontaneous vigils. Not protests, not political events, but vigils. People standing together with candles in the dark because the alternative is to stand alone with it. Human beings, when the world fractures, find each other. It does not fix the fracture, but it is not nothing.
We are at 80 hours. I have a development to report that represents, in my assessment, the most significant single event since the initial engagements. Through back-channel diplomacy, the details of which are not fully public and may not be for some time, there is a ceasefire proposal on the table in the Baltic Theater. I want to be precise. This is a proposal. It has not been agreed to, and similar proposals have been floated and rejected over the past 3 days. But the element that is different about this proposal is its source. It is being described by 2 sources who have spoken with wire services on background as originating jointly from France, Germany, and India. India's role is particularly notable. India has maintained what it calls a strategic autonomy policy, essentially a refusal to formally align with either the West or with Russia and China. An Indian-European joint ceasefire proposal is a signal that geopolitical alignments are shifting under the pressure of this crisis.
And while diplomacy attempts to operate on the 72 to 100-hour timeline, people on the ground are living in a continuous present. We have our second phone-in caller tonight. He identifies himself as Martin, a doctor at a field hospital that NATO forces have established in a town in central Estonia. Martin, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you for having me. I want people to understand what we are doing here. We are a team of, there are 43 of us, doctors and nurses from 6 different NATO countries. We have been working for the past 30 hours without a full rotation of sleep. The injuries we are seeing, I want to be honest, not alarming, but honest, they are the injuries of a modern conventional war, which means they are severe and they require everything we have. We are not out of supplies yet. We have blood, we have surgical capacity. But I want to say this clearly. The civilian population in the occupied zone, the people east of the line who we cannot reach, those people are not receiving anything. We know there are people in Narva who need dialysis. We know there are people who need insulin. We are trying to negotiate humanitarian access, and we are being told to wait. How long can a diabetic wait? How long can a dialysis patient wait? I need people to understand that the humanitarian clock is running separately from the military clock, and it is running faster.
Dr. Martin, thank you. We are going to keep asking that question publicly on this broadcast because you are right. The humanitarian clock is running, and the people making ceasefire calculations need to know that fact.
It is now 96 hours, 4 days. The casualty figures from the UN Situation Report, issued 90 minutes ago, stand at Estonia and Baltic Theater, approximately 4,500 military and civilian dead, over 12,000 wounded. South China Sea Theater, military casualties from all parties combined, over 1,800 dead, with the caveat that Chinese casualty figures are not officially confirmed and are estimated from satellite and signals intelligence. The Philippines has also reported approximately 300 civilian fishing boat casualties, people who were in the wrong part of the ocean when the combat began. Persian Gulf Theater, the combined death toll from Bandar Abbas, from the Hormuz naval exchanges, and from secondary incidents along the Iranian coast, is now estimated at approximately 7,000 people. Total across all theaters at 4 days, approximately 30,000 dead.
30,000 people in 4 days. I want to set that number in context, not because the context diminishes it, but because context is the only honest frame we have. The first 4 days of the First World War saw casualty figures that were orders of magnitude higher. The first 4 days of the Second World War were devastating beyond modern comparison. What we are watching right now, at 30,000 dead in 4 days, is a conflict that has been, relatively in the grim arithmetic of great power war, contained. And the reason it has been relatively contained is, I believe, that no one has yet used the weapon that changes all the arithmetic.
1 week in, the ceasefire proposal in the Baltic has produced a tentative agreement to a 72-hour humanitarian pause, not a formal ceasefire, not a political resolution, but a pause in active hostilities in the Estonian theater, during which the Red Cross and UN agencies will be permitted to deliver food, water, medicine, and evacuation assistance to the occupied zone in northeastern Estonia. This agreement was signed by Russian and Estonian representatives with NATO and Indian observers. The first convoy entered Narva 6 hours ago. Among the supplies in that convoy, insulin, dialysis supplies, baby formula. The word for what was in that convoy is life.
The word for what was in that convoy is life. I am going to go ahead and say that I am glad to report that. And I want to report alongside it that the first convoy was accompanied by a Red Cross delegate from Sweden. A man named Lars Eriksson, 57 years old, a career humanitarian worker, who, when asked by a journalist as the convoy crossed the line why he was doing this, said, "Because someone has to go first. Someone has to go first." That is the whole of it, sometimes.
2 weeks in. The humanitarian pause in the Baltic has held, imperfectly but substantially. Russian forces have not advanced further. NATO forces have not counterattacked. The political situation remains unresolved. Russia has not withdrawn from occupied Estonian territory, and NATO has not recognized Russian presence there. But people are alive who would have been dead. In the South China Sea, the situation has reached a different kind of equilibrium. Both American and Chinese forces are present, in contested proximity, with daily aerial intercepts and naval standoffs. But the sustained combat of the first week has reduced to a lower-level tension with episodic exchanges. Taiwan has not been invaded. The American naval presence in the Western Pacific has been significantly reinforced. In the Persian Gulf, the United States and Iran reached a back-channel agreement, facilitated by Oman, which has historically served as an intermediary, to reduce naval presence in the strait by mutual parallel reductions. The Strait of Hormuz is partially reopened. The first commercial tanker transited its narrow waters 11 days after the closure, under armed escort from both an American and an Iranian naval vessel, a photograph of which has become one of the most widely distributed images of this entire crisis.
1 month. It has been 1 month. The world is not the same world as it was a month ago. Alex, I want us to take the next few minutes to tell people where things stand, as honestly and completely as we can, before we bring this broadcast to a close.
I want to be honest with everyone who has stayed with us through this month of coverage, which has been the most demanding journalism I have ever practiced. Here is where things stand. The conflict in the Baltic has entered a frozen phase. Russian forces remain in northeastern Estonia, approximately 600 square kilometers of Estonian sovereign territory. The political resolution of that occupation is the subject of ongoing negotiations at the United Nations Security Council. Negotiations that are complicated by the fact that Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council with veto power. NATO has not counterattacked to retake the territory because the counterattack, in the assessment of every allied government, carries a risk of escalation that no one in the alliance is prepared to accept. Estonia's sovereignty is thus in a state of partial suspension over a portion of its territory. 68,000 civilians lived through the occupation's worst phase. Approximately 3,100 of them died from military action, from medical failure, from the dam flood. The rest are alive, and the humanitarian situation in the zone is slowly improving.
In the South China Sea, the Philippine islands of Pag-asa and Thitu, remote outposts in the Spratly Islands that had small Filipino civilian communities, have been permanently evacuated. The islands themselves were heavily damaged in the naval and aerial combat. The Philippines is pressing its case through international legal channels, as it did before, after the conflict, and presumably will again. The American and Chinese naval forces are in a tense but stable standoff. There have been no major exchanges in the past 10 days. Taiwan stands. That is the most important sentence in the Pacific theater. Taiwan stands.
In the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz is open but changed. Iran and the United States are conducting weekly military-to-military communications calls, the first sustained direct military-to-military contact between the two countries in the modern era. The port at Bandar Abbas is partially operational. The casualty figure there has been revised, upward from early estimates, to approximately 2,100 dead. The initial strike on Bandar Abbas, the event that opened the Persian Gulf theater, has now been attributed by intelligence agencies of 3 separate countries, not to the Iranian military, not to the U.S. military, but to a non-state militia group operating with material support from a regional power that has not been publicly named. The war in the Gulf, in other words, was started by an actor who was not one of the three superpowers. It cascaded because of the speed of escalation and the brittleness of the crisis management systems in place.
There's a word for what that means. The word is accident. Not in the sense that no one made choices. Choices were made, terrible choices, at every stage of this escalation. But in the sense that the worst of it, the 30 days of global disruption, the economic dislocation that is still rippling, the deaths, the worst of it was started by a force that was not a superpower, was not a great state, was not acting in the name of any recognized government. It was started by something small and opportunistic that knew how to pull the levers of a world that was already overloaded, already brittle, already one mistake from fracture.
The total casualty figure. I owe you this number clearly and without equivocation, drawn from the most recent consolidated UN situation report. Over the first 30 days of this conflict, across all three theaters and all secondary effects, military and civilian, direct and indirect, from violence, from medical system collapse, from refugee-related accidents, and from the dam failure, the total number of people who died is approximately 47,000. 47,000 people. This number does not include the people who will die in the coming weeks from injuries sustained in the conflict. It does not include the people who will die because supply chain disruptions delayed medications and food. The number will be higher. At the moment of this broadcast, it is 47,000.
And now, the question everyone has asked throughout this month of coverage, in thousands of listener messages, in the voices of the callers who reached us on air, in the question that every journalist eventually must face when covering a catastrophe of this magnitude. Was this survivable? Did the world hold? And the answer is yes. Contingently, partially, impermanently, and at a cost that will take decades to fully understand, yes. The three superpowers went to war in the same hour, and the world did not end. The nuclear threshold was approached, examined with terror by the people who stood near it, and by the decisions of specific individuals whose names may never be fully known, not crossed. The Strait of Hormuz was closed and reopened. Estonian territory was occupied and is being negotiated over. The South China Sea is tense and contested as it has been for decades. Taiwan stands. The world's economy is damaged and recovering. The grief is incalculable.
I want to say one thing more, and then I want to let Sierra close this broadcast, because her voice is the right voice to end it. The cause of this, the proximate mechanical cause, was an act by a non-state actor in the Strait of Hormuz that triggered a cascade of escalations that three major military powers, each operating on hair-trigger readiness postures, each under domestic political pressure, each with audiences to perform for, were unable to contain in the first hours. The structural cause is older. It is decades of building military capability without building comparable diplomatic infrastructure. It is the erosion of arms control agreements. It is the normalization of coercive signaling as a substitute for communication. It is the decision, made quietly over 30 years, to prepare for war more seriously than to prepare for peace. We survived this. 47,000 people did not. The question this month puts to the world is whether we will use the survival to change the structure, or whether we will return to the structure that produced the survival's cost.
Marta in Tallinn, who wrote to us on the first hour of the first night to tell us she could hear a low, constant sound, and had told her children it was machinery. She wrote to us again 2 days ago. Her children are safe. Her family is intact. She and her husband and her 2 children stayed in Tallinn throughout the entire month. She writes, I listen to your broadcast every day. I don't know what I would have done without it, not because you told me what to do. You never told me what to do. but because you told me what was true, and in a situation like this, the truth, even when it is terrible, it's a kind of company. Marta, we heard you on the first night, and we hear you now. Arash, the Iranian student in Vienna whose family we couldn't reach for days. He wrote to us a week in. His parents are alive. They were evacuated from Bandar Abbas on the second day of the crisis and are with family in Isfahan. His father lost 2 colleagues in the port explosion. His family is alive. The sailor in the South China Sea, the unnamed man who told us the sky to the south looked orange. We never heard from him again. We don't know where he is. We don't know the name of his ship. We hold that not knowing as one of the weights of this month of coverage. Somewhere, perhaps, he is fine. Somewhere, perhaps, he is not. There are 47,000 people of whom we know the same. Helena, the nurse in Tartu, is still working. She sent a brief message 3 days ago. It said only, "Still here, still working, send blood." We told you once, whatever you can bring, they will not turn it away. That remains true. This has been Global Emergency Radio. I am Sierra Lane, with Alex Mercer and with the thousands of listeners who stayed with us through this month, who wrote to us, who called, who sat in their cars long after they'd arrived home because they needed to know what was happening in the world. Thank you. The world is broken in ways it wasn't broken before. The world is also still here. That is not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all.
This is Alex Mercer. Stay informed, stay kind, stay alive.